Let's summarize the plot of A Tale of Two Cities. The introduction establishes the novel's setting in both London and Paris in the late 18th century. Life is hard for the common people, and made harder by the brutal oppression cast upon them by nobles. The rising action begins in 1775, where Mr. Jarvis Lorry of Tellson's Bank meets with young Lucy Manette from London. On the way, the coach is stopped by a messenger from Tellson's, Jerry, who gives Lorry a note. Lorry tells Jerry to take a message back to the bank, recalled to life. When Lorry arrives, he meets with Lucy and tells her that her father, whom she believed dead, is actually alive and has been released from prison, and is staying at the house of a former servant. When Lorry and Lucy arrive at the Paris wine shop of Monsieur and Madame Defarge, they meet Dr. Manette, who obsessively makes shoes. She and Lorry take Dr. Manette out of Paris. 5 years later in London, Charles Darnay is being tried for treason. John Barsad and Roger Cly, two spies, testify against him. Mr. Stryver, Darnay's lawyer, points out that Sidney Carton, his associate, looks exactly like Charles Darnay. Darnay is acquitted. In Paris, the Marquis has his carriage drive through the streets so fast that he kills the peasant Gaspard's child. The Marquis flips him a coin and drives on. That evening, he meets with Charles Darnay, his nephew, and Darnay gives up his inheritance. That night, someone stabs the Marquis to death. A year later, Darnay tells Dr. Manette he wants to marry Lucy. Meanwhile, Sidney Carton tells Lucy that he will do anything for the people she loves. Gaspard has been caught and hanged for the death of the Marquis. Madame Defarge adds John Barsad and the Marquis' family to her register, the list of people she wants to be killed, recorded in her knitting. Lucy marries Darnay. After a meeting with Darnay, the traumatized doctor reverts to his old shoemaking habit, but he recovers. Over the next few years, Lucy and Darnay have a daughter, little Lucy, and a son who dies young. In 1789, the Paris revolutionaries stormed the Bastille, led by the Defarges. Revolutionaries burned down the Marquis' mansion. In 1792, Darnay learns that Gabelle, his uncle's former servant, has been imprisoned and goes to France to save him. When Charles Darnay arrives in France, he is imprisoned. Dr. Manette tries to get him out, but he is unsuccessful. It is a year and 3 months before Darnay is released, but he is quickly arrested again. And in the explosive climax of the novel, he's denounced by the Defarges and a third person. During the falling action, the third person is revealed as an unwitting Dr. Manette, though it's through a letter found in his old cell. The letter says the Marquis raped and killed a peasant woman and, with Darnay's father, killed the woman's father and husband as well as her brother, who hid their younger sister before he died. Dr. Manette tried to report the crime, but had been captured and imprisoned by the Marquis before he could do so. The jury condemns Darnay to death. Miss Pross learns Barsad is her estranged brother, and Carton blackmails him. Sidney Carton discovers Madame Defarge is the younger sister. Carton tells Lorry to get the doctor, Lucy, and little Lucy out of Paris. During the resolution, he goes to the prison with Barsad, exchanges clothes with Darnay, and drugs him. Barsad takes Darnay out of the prison and leads his family to escape. Carton stays in the cell. Madame Defarge tries to find Lucy and her daughter, but is killed by Miss Pross, Lucy's guardian. A peaceful and selfless Sidney Carton is guillotined in Darnay's place. Let's review the main characters in A Tale of Two Cities, starting with Charles Darnay. At the beginning of the novel, the innocent Charles Darnay is being tried in England at the Old Bailey for treason. Sidney Carton gets him acquitted. He meets and falls in love with Lucy Manette and marries her. His secret is that he is of the same French aristocratic family that imprisoned her father, Dr. Manette. Darnay is a good man, repentant for his family's terrible acts. He is saved again from death by Sidney Carton. Sidney Carton is another important character. A lawyer who drinks heavily and happens to look a lot like Charles Darnay, Carton becomes reluctant friends with Darnay because he is in love with Lucy Manette, but he knows he cannot have her. Carton's depression and low self-esteem turn around, and he changes his life for the better. His love for Lucy is so strong that he vows to do anything for those she loves, so she can have a good life. In the end, he sacrifices his life to save Darnay from the guillotine. At the beginning of the novel, Lucy Manette is only 17 and has been told by Mr. Lorry, her guardian and advisor, that her father, whom she believes dead, is actually alive. Bringing him back to London to live with her, Lucy is the golden thread who ties together nearly all the other characters. She marries Charles Darnay, becomes friends with Laurie, and is loved by Sidney Carton. Her goodness and link to Darnay make her a target for Madame Defarge. Miss Pross and Dr. Manette dogmatically protect her. Dr. Manette is a frail former prisoner who can do nothing but make shoes all day long. Rescued by his daughter Lucy, he becomes a stable, loving father and solid friend, unless something reminds him of his time in prison. Even though Darnay is the nephew of the man who imprisoned him, Dr. Manette accepts Darnay into his family for Lucy's sake. He is willing to fight for Darnay's life, using his ex-prisoner hero status to help in that fight. Mr. Jarvis Lorry is the one who discovers that Dr. Manette is actually alive and has survived his imprisonment. As the financial advisor to the family and Lucy's guardian for financial purposes, Laurie tries to keep their relationship professional, but he's emotional and becomes like family to them. Monsieur Defarge seems to be an ally of Dr. Manette, his one-time employer, having gotten Dr. Manette out of Paris. However, as a leader of the revolutionaries, Monsieur Defarge cannot simply stand by and allow Charles Darnay to come back to Paris without any consequences, regardless of the fact that he is now Dr. Manette's son-in-law. Defarge is one of the people who denounces Darnay in court and brings forth Dr. Manette's letter denouncing Darnay as well. He is kinder than his sinister wife. Madame Defarge is admirably strong in her determination to fight for the revolution, but she is also vindictive and cruel. Often silent but violent, she has no mercy whatsoever, knitting names of those she wants killed into her death register. Let's review the symbols in A Tale of Two Cities. The first is echoing footsteps. From the beginning of the novel, the echoes of approaching footsteps represent threat. From Jerry Cruncher approaching the mail coach to the Manette's home in a recessed corner of London, even the tapping of raindrops on the pavement sounds like footsteps. In such sounds, Lucy Manette imagines the echoes of her family's footsteps and of people she has yet to meet. A storm can sound like a crowd approaching. As the revolution begins in France, the narrator foreshadows the bloody footsteps of revolutionaries growing louder. England is another symbol. England has its own dangers, violence, injustice, and difficulty. But politically, it's far more stable than France. And for the Manette family and Charles Darnay, it is a safe haven, and it represents stability and safety. And France is another symbol. It symbolizes utter chaos, loss of humanity, and violence. The French Revolution and the frustration, despair, hunger, and mistreatment have turned the entire society upside down. Everyone is a suspect, everyone is a possible enemy, and generally decent, repressed people have become cold-blooded murderers in the name of liberty. Thread and knitting is a key symbol threaded through the novel. The golden thread is the name of Book 2, and that golden thread is Lucy, who connects all of the people in the English storyline of the book. Her thread is golden because she is a good-hearted and loving person who would never do anyone any harm. Meanwhile, in France, Madame Defarge, with her knitting, is the thread connecting the revolutionaries and their victims, including Darnay and his family. Her knitting is really her kill list, registering the condemned. The guillotine is another symbol. The ultimate symbol of death, injustice, and revenge, the guillotine is a quick way to die, but it is also gory and very public, quickly reducing the formerly mighty and arrogant to decapitated corpses, much to the delight of the bloodthirsty crowds. However, it is also the last stop in a corrupt system that lumps the innocent in with the guilty, offering no due process. The guillotine casts a long, literal and figurative shadow over everyone's lives. Let's review the main themes in A Tale of Two Cities. The first is injustice. Many people who did so little to deserve severe punishment fill the novel with injustice. Dr. Manette's imprisonment, which tore him down emotionally, was unjust. Being imprisoned for trying to do something honorable, which Darnay also does, is pure injustice. Darnay renounces his heritage because of the cruelty his family inflicted on people, but revolutionaries want to guillotine him for being part of an aristocratic family that had previously done wrong. And most nobles unjustly go too long without their own punishment. Another theme is love. Dickens explores many powerful love relationships in the book. Romantic love, love between parent and child, love from afar, love between friends, and love for mankind. He also examines differences between people in how they love, as well as how love can be twisted or even overridden by circumstance or an individual's foibles. Lucy and her father, Lucy and her daughter, Lucy and Darnay, the Manettes, even Laurie and Carton. The bonds of love are everywhere. Resurrection is another theme. Recalled to life is an important message in the novel. Dr. Manette was imprisoned for 18 years in the Bastille, but he is not resurrected from death just once. In his making shoes, he's completely separated from the real world, and it is Lucy who resurrects him once again to return him to a real life and familial love in London. Other characters who also experience resurrections are Charles Darnay, who survives several death sentences, Roger Cly, whose funeral is held in Book 1, but who turns up alive later, and John Barsad and Madame Defarge, who experience resurrections when their true identities become known. Self-sacrifice is another key theme. Lucy embodies self-sacrifice, taking on her father and caring for him. Dr. Manette's effort to report rape and murder by denouncing the Marquis and his brother is another example of it, since he risks his own safety by doing so. Charles Darnay puts his life on the line, standing up for an aristocrat's servant, risking his own life. But Sidney Carton makes the ultimate self-sacrifice. He takes Darnay's place at the guillotine in order to make sure that Lucy and her family will be together and happy. Vengeance is another important theme. When the tables turned on the cruel aristocracy and the revolution got underway in France, the common people, driven by generations of starvation and mistreatment, went even further. Dickens examines the topic of vengeance from the perspective of not only classes, but also of individuals. For some, like Madame Defarge and many other revolutionaries, vengeance is the primary driver of their actions. For others, such as Charles Darnay, the Manettes, and Sidney Carton, vengeance is another form of violence and should be avoided, as it perpetuates it. Violence is indeed a theme. The French Revolution was all about bloodshed, and Dickens portrays it graphically, including state-sanctioned torture and killing, mob violence, and the brutal reign of terror. As the novel progresses, the revolution takes hold, and violence becomes increasingly brutal and pervasive.